everyone. Welcome to my second episode of the Vocal Action Podcast. For those of you all that are watching and for you all that are listening, we have a special guest here on the podcast, Patsy Jean-Pierre. Did I say that right?
That's right.
Yes. And I'm really excited to have her on this episode where we are just going to be talking about allyship and what makes a really great ally and why Patsy's a great ally. It's also a prime opportunity for me to catch up with Patsy, who I've known since, did we meet in seventh grade? Yep. Who I've known since seventh grade. We went to the same school, Boston Latin School, and yeah, it'll be a good time for me to catch up on all the great things that are going on in her life. So Patsy is from Boston, and she currently has her own private practice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Village Healing and Wellness. So that is a shout out for those of y'all that are looking for services, coaching, or even clinical supervision. And we'll get more into the services and why she started her own business. So before we start, I really just want to say, like, how have you been? I don't even know the last time I saw you. Like, when?
Probably reunion, 10-year reunion.
Yeah, we're at 15 this year. Like, we hit 15.
I know, and I'm nervous this year because I will have 2 infants at that time who are like under a certain amount of months. So I'm like, first of all, am I going to have the energy to go? And second of all, what am I going to look like going? So I do not want to be a mess at 15-year reunion. And you know I love BLS, so I'll probably be there as a mess, as a messy mom.
I doubt it. I feel like that's going to be your one night out. You know what I mean? So you'll be like half a mess. Like
yeah, I'll be like pumping in the bathroom, but also maybe having a gin and tonic. We'll see.
Yes. Congratulations on having twins. You got married. Now you got married during the pandemic, right? Like officially.
Yeah. So Julian and I met in 2014 through actually another BLS friend.
And Julian is her husband. For those of you all that are listening, as she said, also went to Latin, right? And he's here behind us, right?
Yeah, he was class of 2008, and we didn't know each other at BLS. I knew of him, but we weren't friends there, and I didn't meet him until 2014. Actually, I went to a friend's birthday party in New York, and we were introduced, and the rest is history. Yeah.
How did that go? You saw him, were you like, "Hey, Julian," you know?
Or... Actually, no. When we were first introduced, I was really nervous because it was through Chidozi. So Chidozi always used to throw these massive birthday parties in New York. And he's
another BLS grad for those that are watching and listening. Yes.
He'd throw these massive, he'd invite so many people. And it was always at the end of June. That's when his birthday is. So I had Father's Day obligations, my mom's birthday, and my brother. I could never make it. And I never thought it was a big deal that I couldn't make it. But Chidozi would always remind me later that it was actually a big deal that I couldn't make it. So one year I was able to make it, and I was really excited to go. I hadn't been back to New York since grad school, or I had been back, but it was just different. But I was with a bunch of Dozy's friends, and so they were all 08 kids who I loved and enjoyed being around, but they weren't my close group of friends. Right. So I was pretty nervous going into that setting because there were so many people invited that I figured I'd be sleeping in like the bathtub or like the kitchen floor. Because back in grad school days, we just didn't have it like that to get, Airbnbs and whatever. Right. So when Chidozi introduced me to Julian had actually surprised him and come up for the birthday party. He hadn't been to one of his birthday parties in a long time. They hadn't seen each other in a while. Yeah, so Dozy was
in the doghouse.
Yes, actually we were. And Julian walked in like, "Oh my God, Dozy, so good to see you." Chidozi was like very surprised to see him as well. And I was there straightening my hair and like trying to get ready for the night. And Jules was like, "Oh, like Jules, you remember Patsy, right, from BLS?" And he was like, "No, never seen her in my life." Anyways, and just like caught up with those right in front of me. And I was like, "Oh, wow, I feel really dismissed right now."
Right.
Like, oh, I feel really,
Okay, Jules.
yeah, I was like, I'm gonna go get some Fireball now. So,
Right.
uh,
Did you feel dismissed because when you saw him, you were kind of like, oh, or just
no,
because of
he was
just the
wearing like
nature of how
basketball
you did it?
shorts and a white tee, and it was just sort of
Okay.
like, it
Okay.
was just like, I don't care about this girl.
Okay. Okay.
And that kind of is who Julian is. He's kind of like we make fun of him. He's our friend Sherry calls him intimately social.
Yeah.
So he's like, he only really cares about people he cares about. And so I was
Hmm.
not one of those people in that moment.
Right.
And so later in the night, he couldn't get onto the train because he didn't know how to use the train pass, and I helped him get on the train. And then he bought me a drink later at the bar, and I was like, all right, I'll forgive this kid. And
Oh,
on the train ride down, we started talking about family, and yeah, just really, we really connected well, and that was kind
here
of
you
it. It was,
are, married
yeah,
and baking two cookies now.
yep. We have twins coming along. So yeah, so we got married during the pandemic. Our whole wedding got exploded by pandemic, and then we couldn't get any of our money back from our vendors, so we had to reschedule. So we had a
Yeah.
secondary celebration, which was honestly, both were really incredible for different reasons. But um, yeah, in terms of like culture, and dynamics, planning a wedding, a lot of that stuff came up. Like a lot of the stuff around how to honor both families, how to
Yeah.
honor both traditions. We had a fantastic DJ who handled it very well.
Yes, and who for those who don't know, Julian, and if you don't know by Patsy's last name, is Haitian. And Patsy, where's your family from?
We're Irish Catholic Scottish.
Okay.
So my mom's family actually both my parents' families were born in Boston,
Okay.
and so yeah. So surprisingly, there's a lot of overlap between Irish families and Haitian families, in
Hmm.
that like they're Christian based, or you know, there's a lot of Christian faith there.
Hmm.
Really strong family values. Have overcome, Irish people and Haitian people have overcome a ton of adversity in terms of like figuring out career path,
Hmm.
um and yeah, so there's a lot of the same values, but there are definitely different challenges that each culture has faced. And so Julian's family welcomed me really with open arms. I can't express like how thankful I am about that.
Yeah.
um And I think my family also accepted Julian with open arms.
Was your family surprised?
No, they were
I
not.
was gonna say, if you know,
They were not
um,
shocked.
yes, yes, yes. To know Patsy, she's always had, I feel like you've always had like a really diverse group of friends. Um,
Right.
and so it was, yeah, like I wasn't shocked. I know when I saw it, I was just kind of like, well, that seems like Patsy, because really
Yeah.
you can
Yeah,
go
they were. They
anywhere.
definitely weren't. They definitely were not shocked. I think they were excited to. I had never really brought anyone home
Oh,
as
they
a
were just like,
partner.
oh, thank God.
They were like, oh, they were wondering for a while what was happening with me.
Uh-huh. Oh, thank God.
Yeah, they were pretty happy to know that I found someone, and that he was a great guy. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's Julian and I.
And what about, well, before we go into you, do you know what you're having? Do you know
Oh
this?
yes, we're having twins, and we're having a boy and a girl. We have
Yes,
we have a
that is
lot.
so.
Yeah, we've had a lot of surprises. So I mentioned to you this was not our timeline, because I quit my full-time job in
Hmm.
December, and then we found out we were pregnant at the very beginning of February.
Hmm.
Then we found out we were having twins in March, which was not the plan, also. Um, and then we had blood work taken, and we were told it was two boys. And then at my ultrasound at like 23 weeks, the ultrasound technician was like, no, that's a baby girl in there. You're having a boy and a girl. So we've just had like surprise after surprise after surprise.
Wow.
Yeah.
And who knows? You could like give birth to 2 girls at this point, right? The way it's going.
Yeah, we could. I mean, we were making jokes that like if it was 2 boys, we were gonna have a really hard time finding names because we just did not agree.
Uh-huh.
So if it's 2 girls, we'll have an easier time. But let's just hopefully we'll just no more surprises is the hope. Just healthy babies is the hope. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's been really crazy. I know part of your interest was around like the entrepreneurial part of this work, and I did a lot of reaching out to other classmates, other recent grads or social workers
Cool.
who are in private practice, and I did a lot of thinking. I had a lot of self-doubt around going into private practice, um, but it was the time for me to do it, and so I did all this planning, and then bang, got pregnant.
Yeah, let's talk about what like because plans get interrupted, right? They always say like if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan.
Mhm.
So what can you talk about like what has been your path? So like if you feel like you've been following a plan up to this point, what has been your path?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like my identity as a social worker and in the career path, that really became solidified through my experience going to Boston Public Schools.
Mhm.
From birth, I was a Boston Public School student. Went to the Charles Sumner in Rosendale, and then I went to the Washington Irving, and then got into BLS. And in my elementary and middle school experience, there was not a lot of diversity.
Mhm.
It was predominantly Black schools that I went to, because in the 90s at the time, and probably still, public schools were predominantly Black and brown.
Mhm.
And especially um,
Public
pre
schools in Boston.
in Boston,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because there's a history of white flight. There were
Mhm.
when busing occurred, a lot of white families took their kids out of public schools, put them in private schools, and a million other reasons, right? But
Mhm.
that's sort of that's the perspective that I understood and that I experienced. Um, so in elementary school, I was usually one of the only white kids. For a while, I was the only white girl in my grade, like fourth grade, fifth grade at Charles Sumner.
Mhm.
And then when I went to the Irving, there was an advanced standing class, which um, the advanced standing class there were plenty of white kids, but
Mhm.
the general makeup of the Irving at the time was predominantly Black and brown.
Now
So
was
that
your
was
neighborhood the same makeup where you lived?
At the time in Rosendale, yes.
Okay.
It has shifted a lot. It has shifted a lot. So, I grew up really close to Rosendale Square.
Mhm.
Most of my neighbors were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Haitian, um, or West Indian,
Mhm.
or Black. And
Yeah.
over the years, that has shifted a lot in Rosendale. And different parts of Roslindale have different pockets of diversity. There are
Right.
some areas that historically have always been really white,
Mhm.
and then there have been some areas that have historically always been Black and brown. In our family, my mom and dad bought the house that we live in 35 years ago, and our street was a lot of multifamily homes, and so a lot of diversity on our street. Um,
Yeah, I feel like I've been to your house maybe once or twice.
mhm.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, yeah, it was a really cool neighborhood to grow up in. Like we were I feel like we were one of the last generations to like be out until the streetlights came on, like we didn't
Yeah,
have
all
cell
the
phones. Yeah, we had a lot of
stayed
like
outside.
you played outside, you hung out with your neighbors, and we had a lot of kids in our neighborhood, which was really awesome. We had a basketball hoop in our backyard, so a lot of kids came over and like played basketball, and so yeah. And I think another piece that kind of so I guess when I think about like how that impacted my experience in school, um, one, I didn't recognize it in the 6th grade when there was like such a huge separation. Like when I got into the advanced standing class, I was kind of like, this is weird. There was some diversity in the advanced standing class, but it was really
Not at the same.
definitely, yeah, it was definitely not representative of the school. And I was kind of confused by that. Because that had been like I had been around. I had always been around. I was always one of the only few white kids. So when I was in the advanced studying class and there were more white kids, I was kind of like, oh, interesting. Um, this is new. And then when I went to Boston Latin School, I was like, whoa,
Mhm.
where have all of these
Black people
white
gone.
white people come from? Like Boston, I thought Boston was predominantly black, and then I realized like over time, like no, 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 just my experience was not.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I think that there were times when I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I fit in at BLS. And a
Really?
lot.
Wait, I wanna make sure we talk about that because I had a bit of the opposite experience. Like, I I was one of those young people who, for the most part, I stayed in, but for like Boston is pretty segregated. And I get this question all the time. People are like, "Oh, you're from Boston? I heard it's racist," or
It
"I didn't
is.
know there were black people that lived there." Like that's like the
Mm,
first thing. And what I always say is like I'm not gonna say racism does not exist in Boston. That would be a lie. Okay,
mm,
it's definitely there. It's an old city, like, and yes, all of that is there. Um, However, I do somewhat feel like because Boston's so segregated, sometimes unless you have an experience like you where you live and you're able to go to school and it's like different. The people there look different than what you see in your home. That is somewhat introduces you to what you think Boston is. And I know for me, growing up in Roxbury, like I rarely left my neighborhood. Like I remember my mom used to drive out to Saugus, her and my grandmother take me to Spanish classes. And so I saw white people there. My mom worked at Brigham and Women's Hospital. My dad worked at Children's. So I saw white people there. Like my doctors and stuff were white. But like my friends and the things that I needed all lived in the same neighborhood. Like my church was in the same neighborhood. Like I never really ventured like or even had a desire to like leave Black Boston, as
yeah,
I say,
yeah,
uh, until I went to Latin. Like when I went to Latin, it was just like,
a whole new world.
dang, like Boston, really, like
Yeah, I didn't.
I
And
never
the reach of the city, it was like, oh, Charlestown is in Boston, or like there were
right,
just parts of
yeah.
like parts of Boston that I hadn't explored. So I agree. But also when we were younger, we weren't taking the bus and train. Like once we got to
Mhm.
BLS, we were taking the bus and train. We were able to sort of navigate the city in a different way. We were able to explore it in a different way. So well, when I got there, I felt kind of overwhelmed because
Really.
yeah, and part of it was that I came from a single parent home.
Mhm.
And my siblings, two of my siblings went to Boston Latin School. And so they were older than me, my two older sisters. And they put all this anxiety around like how difficult the work is, how much of an
Mhm.
honor it is to go there and how hard you're going to have to work. And I honestly never really felt like I was a naturally really very, very, very intelligent kid, the way that like my two sisters were just naturally
Mhm.
brilliant. I felt like I had to work really hard to maintain myself at BLS. My fifth grade teacher encouraged me to apply. I didn't even want to go because I saw how stressed out my sisters were all the time with how much homework they
Wow.
had. Yeah. So when I got there, I one like didn't have a lot of confidence that I would do well.
Mhm.
And two, I there were just some cultural things that I couldn't relate to with some of the other kids in the class. And I think because I felt because of my experience in elementary and middle school where I was usually around more black and brown kids who also had single parent homes or also had um, maybe some financial stress.
Mhm.
There
And
was
who
more
lives
to
in your neighborhood?
and lived in the same neighborhood. Yeah, exactly. There were times when like I didn't quite understand the wealth gap. Um,
Mhm.
or like I didn't understand and I felt like some pressure to I just felt confused. I felt like I just had a hard
Yeah.
time figuring out like who is gonna be my friend here. Who
Did
do
you
I
ever
want to make friends
feel
with?
like did you ever feel like pulls? Like, did you ever feel like people, especially because Latin was so, and this was not even on top, but now like we're talking about it, so I'm all in here. But like, did you ever feel pulled in a way where it's like people were like, maybe the white kids were looking at you like, why is Patsy always with the black kids? And then I don't know if I don't ever remember any of us feeling like, why is Patsy always with us? Like, so, but did you ever like feel that? Like, why? Like did that make you also?
Yeah, it came up.
Like, how come I don't have more in common, or like, why am I over here? Like, is this where I fit? Like, why?
Yeah, no, I questioned it. I questioned it a lot. So I think my family's huge. So I come from a huge family. My mom's one of 10. I have 30 plus amazing cousins on my mom's side, many more on my dad's side that I was close with. So like, so growing up, my cousins were my best friends. I didn't really have like close friend networks actually until I met Arlene, who also went to BLS. She came to my, we met in elementary school in 5th grade when she moved up from Florida. And she and I became friends like immediately. And so I feel like Arlene was actually the bridge for me into making friends that had similar socioeconomic status, background, family dynamic. So like if you took race out of the picture, which is always a very hard thing to do, I think the thing that I felt most comfortable around was like kids who came from parents with either like parents who hadn't been married, or parents who had been divorced, or like really working class parents. Because we just did not have a lot growing up. So my mom didn't finish her degree until I was a junior in high school. She always worked more than 40 hours. My sister did a lot of parenting. She did a lot of the cooking when we were home. I'm one of 4. We got jobs when we were 14 immediately. That was like the expectation. If you wanted anything other than like 1 or 2 new outfits for the start of the school year and 1 pair of new sneakers, then you had to get a job. If you wanted anything more than that, you had to pay for it yourself.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted hand-me-downs, in which case like it was tough, So yeah, so Arlene and I were just like sisters from the beginning, and so she sort of introduced me to the group that I became close with at BLS, and I did oftentimes feel pulled. And and throughout my life, like there's just like funny cultural things that would happen. Like a lot of the Black girls in my elementary school would want to braid my hair. So like I'd come home from school wearing cornrows, and my family would be like,
"What's happening?
Why are you wearing cornrows?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. Linnea should do this. It's nice."
Right.
And like actually Kenyatta used to braid my hair all the time. And I liked it, and I thought it was fine. And then I realized like maybe that's not appropriate culturally. Right. But I think because I was invited in, it didn't feel inappropriate to me. But my family members, like I remember for Christmas one year, like I asked for like a FUBU jacket, and my brother was like, "Patsy, do you know what that means?" And I was like,
right.
No, but all the kids wear it, and I really want it. I want the light blue one with the yellow, like
right.
And it was like, that's for us, by us. That's like a Black company. That's not for you. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that sucks because I really wanted that jacket. So like there was just like stuff that I, and I remember Arlene kind of taking me under her wing in terms of like fashion, because it was like if your belt didn't match your shoes, you like weren't.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was that little phase, and I was like, I don't even know where to buy a belt. Like I don't wear a belt.
Yeah.
So I was just like, I remember Arlene giving me like her Air Forces one time, like her hand-me-downs, and I was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. And I was always a thick girl, so I never really got down with that fashion, just because like, wearing a belt, my stomach, the way it looked with the tucked in, it just was not me.
I wanted to wear a hoodie and hide.
Right. Like, yeah, I don't know if I was hiding, because I was good. But I definitely got into blazers, if you remember, like jeans, like I just was, yeah. but at that time they also didn't have like fashionable clothes for plus size girls. So when I look at some of my photos, and even now, sometimes I'm like, I feel like I dress a little older, but that's because when you're a big girl, I felt at that time, I feel like your fashion kind of goes that way because that you're shopping in the women's section, you know?
Yeah, I was always anxious about my body image at BLS. I always, and like I look back now and I'm like, oh my God, I was so skinny back then. What the hell, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did I think anything about my body? But it was, yeah, I developed early. I had like big boobs really early, and I would hide under hoodies. So I was like, give me a sweatshirt and some sneakers, and I was very much a tomboy, and yeah. But no, there were times when I felt, for the most part, with my close friend group, I felt very, very welcome. You know, very, very welcome. I never felt uncomfortable. But I think like with the larger group, there were times when like my um my presence was like questioned, or just like maybe not always appreciated. Which felt hard. Like there were times where I didn't really feel fully accepted. And I was defensive around that, and that was definitely hard. And then there were other times when I felt like I didn't quite fit like in either area. So I think for that reason I don't miss high school that much. But for the most part, there's a lot, like I made my core group of friends in high school, and like we still all stay in touch, and I'm very thankful for that. So it was different when I went to college and I went to a private school. Then I was really shell shocked of like, oh my God, there's such a difference in wealth gap. I went to Providence College. It was predominantly white. I felt so uncomfortable. It was really, it was tough for me to make friends. And anyways, but yeah, so I think that the reason why I decided to be a social worker was actually through facing history in ourselves, taking that course and like having a space to actually unpack all of the issues around diversity in our city and the history of like systematic oppression and busing and segregation and desegregation and civil rights movements. And so Miss Freeman became like really for me like a safe space to explore. Like I remember at the beginning of the year we did an identity box, and like having an opportunity to really talk about what our identity was and hear from other students. And you do. Of course you do. It's amazing. So yeah, and we went to Europe together, like, you know, so
Yeah.
34.
Yeah,
13.
13 to 34. That's our thing.
Yeah. And so yeah, so I think that when I didn't know what I wanted to do for college, my family, my sister went to college ahead of me, but we were like the first two in our like nuclear family to do that, to go to a 4-year college particularly. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. A lot of my older cousins were teachers, and so I thought maybe I'd be a teacher. But then Miss Freeman actually guided me towards, she's like, have you thought about being a social worker? And I was like, no, I don't know anything about that. So I went to the Copley Library and talked to like some career professionals, and they were like, no, social work is really cool. You can do a lot with it. And when I learned more about it, I was like, oh, this is a whole profession about helping people. Like, yes, I would like to do that. That sounds great. And so a lot of the work that I've been drawn to in my education and in my career and building has been around criminal justice, and like health equity and substance use and mental health support. So since, you know, in my studies, I focused a lot on that. And then when I came home from school, I started working for a prison reentry program. And then I worked for a community health center that served people dealing with HIV, living with HIV and AIDS, and living with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders.
I'm like a social media spy, seriously, because I know a lot about people. I just enjoy I don't know what it is, but I enjoy it. And so I'm always watching with people. I'm just like, oh yeah, I see this. Like, yeah. Like Patsy's posting some of like her clients who have like graduated from the program. Like it's just, yeah, I'm
Yeah, I used to share a lot of client, like, when I could, I'd share, like, a client success story because I
Yeah,
think
I'm like, I'm so weird.
no, you're not weird. I think we all do it. I mean, this is how we stay connected, and it
Yeah.
feels, um we had a really tight community, like, our class,
Mhm.
2007. I think everyone really looked out for each other and, like, cared about each other, and I remember our senior year, everyone sort of all the if there was, like, a clique or, like, a divi it kinda
I
just,
would
like,
agree with
it
that.
just
It just
descended,
everybody
like
meshed together. Yeah,
yeah,
I would
especially in
agree
our
with
senior
that.
year, but it wasn't like that. It was like
It wasn't like that the whole time, but something did happen. I don't know.
something shifted.
It's funny you say that, but because yeah, something did happen. Oftentimes I wonder if it was there's a couple things that I think maybe contribute to that. I I think that I think it started to shift. I would say maybe the end of our sophomore year,
Mm,
a little bit. And at least for me, that's when I started to shift because we had that sophomore semi committee where we were advocating to
mm.
get a sophomore semi wherever it was, even though
In
we
the
had
cafeteria.
area like. But that is when it started, and
Mhm,
then I think junior year, um, taking those AP classes, taking things like facing history, getting into your languages. There were, those were a little more diverse. And if you
and
were
trips, we
traveling
took
in the
trips for
trip,
people.
yeah, like
Yeah.
so that started to blend. And then I think you can definitely see the blend, and particularly for our class officers, like we
Mhm.
are a very diverse board in that way.
Yep.
And then going out with Miss Kelly, who was leaving at the same time. And yeah, and I just think a lot of those things pulling us together. You're right. There was some sort of there was magic. Maybe the basketball games helped with that too, because
I
everyone,
don't yeah,
yeah, it
football, basketball games, yeah. I
yeah,
think it was also this feeling of like, "Oh, we only have 1 more year with each other," like,
yeah,
and that was a big safe space for us for 6 years, like, I mean, some parts of it did not feel super safe, obviously.
right.
Sometimes I still get a stomachache when I go to BLS. I'm like, "Oh, I'm so anxious." Um, I hope there's not a quiz today. Um, but yeah, no, I think something yeah, I feel like it was a safe space around, like,
Yeah.
you got to see your friends every day. You had it was a real our I feel like the friends that we had were really supportive and, like, beyond education. There was people were going through so much. I think because it was a public school, people had so many different things happening in the background, family stuff and um I think our senior year people became a little bit more open and vulnerable about things and we
Yeah.
just knew each other more and
Hmm.
so in that way I feel like we had a really unique I mean it's only my I feel like we had a really unique perspective or like unique experience. Um
Yeah, you're right. Something did happen senior year. There was some magic.
But
Speaking, go
I
ahead.
think also you're right, it did start in the 10th grade because I remember that shift as well, but I think it just, like, busted open senior year. Everyone was kinda like, "Alright, whatever. Whatever is let's just all enjoy each other." It was great.
Yeah, I always feel like I always say my shifts definitely started in ninth grade. Um,
Mhm.
when I met classmate Jenica.
Love
We had
Jenica
this great
Allen.
English class, and
Mhm.
Jenica at the time had her circle was predominantly white. And it started with me being myself and questioning that, like, girl, why you got all these white friends? Like, and that's how like our friendship started. And I'm always grateful to her because I would have never like been to Southie or Coolidge Corner, or I might have even applied for facing history. And so like, if I did not have a friend who was exposed to parts of the city where I did not live and all of my other friends lived, and where I went to
Mhm.
church. Like, there's definitely no way. I
She was
never,
your bridge. She
yeah,
was
I
your
never
bridge.
wanted to go to
Mhm.
Harvard Square. Like, why? Like, what's over there? You know what I mean? Like, just all of like,
Yeah.
why? Um,
Yeah.
yes,
No, definitely.
yeah. I always feel like my exploration of my city outside of Black Boston, how I knew it, definitely was with her introduction. Speaking of safe spaces, oh, go ahead. You want to finish your thought?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
speaking of safe spaces, you have now started a private practice that you mentioned earlier. Village Healing and Wellness. How did you decide on that name?
So I knew that I didn't want from the research that I had done. There was a lot of conversation around like, don't use your name in your business in case you're ever sued. You don't want like you don't want your personal stuff to sort of like mess with your professional stuff. So I have a couple of entrepreneurial friends. We talked a lot about actually Arlene's husband, Javon, and I met around like branding and thinking through branding. And I met with a couple of friends who were a lot of my friends from grad school and from undergrad are in private practice now. And so talking to a lot of them and figuring stuff out. The Rosendale that I grew up in was Rosendale Square always. But recently, like in the last 10, 15 years, they call it Rosendale Village. Which is weird. It's just weird, right? It's a weird shift. And so I was thinking like, right now my office is based in Rosendale. And I knew I wanted to start here. I can walk to work. It's glorious. So I wanted to do something about, and knowing that like there was this history around the word village. I kind of started with thinking about that. And my mom growing up always said like, it takes a village, it takes a village, it takes a village. And we had a lot of help growing up. The Sacred Heart Church was like big and supportive of us. Like I said, my mom was one of 10 aunts, she was one of 10. So all my aunts and uncles, different ways, supported us through like really tough things. My mom was like breast cancer survivor. My dad struggled with substance use disorder. And it truly did take a village to get me where I'm at. And so like I think whenever I think about social work and I think about people work, I tend to look at like what kind of supports do people have, and like how are they utilizing their village, and do they belong in a village? Do they have a holistic supportive network? Because oftentimes the people that I worked with fresh out of grad school, people coming home from jail, people who living in the shelter system, people living outside. Their villages were oftentimes really fragmented based on like the trauma that they had experienced, or they had been outcasted because of different challenges that they faced and different decisions they had to make in challenging moments. So like I worked with a lot of people who spent a lot of time in prison and came home and didn't have a village. And so a lot of the work that I did in the first 10 years of my social work practice was like helping people try to build that village. So that was, for me, it was like, I knew I wanted to do something with village, because I know that you cannot do this stuff alone. Like you cannot overcome trauma by yourself. You can heal, you can do some healing on your own, but it takes a lot of people to support you in that journey. And so, so village was an essential thing. And for me, I really want to help people do healing work. And I also wanted to make space for people who are like further along in their healing journey and want to just like maintain some level of wellness. So it was a lot of back and forth. Julian helped me pick out the name. We wrote some stuff up on the whiteboard. We kind of messed around with it. And then it came down to like what was available when I went to apply for the LLC.
Right.
So it just kind of all came together, but that's sort of why I chose that name. Yeah.
Yeah. And you provide individual counseling, individual therapy. You also provide clinical supervision hours, and then also
like professional development.
Yeah. So what has been some of we were talking prior to us recording about just your caseload and how you only currently have one Black, is it woman, male client?
Yep.
Yeah, you have one Black woman client and maybe some of those barriers to that. Do you what are your thoughts about what those barriers might be?
So the field of social work is dominated by white women, and I think like in terms of thinking about systematic oppression and ways like institutional barriers that are created. It takes a lot to get a social work degree. You have to
Mm,
go, you have to get it. If you want to do individual therapy type work, you have to get your master's and then you have to get licensing. And the field of social work pays really low.
mm,
So, you know, I think that there are obvious barriers for the Black community to get access to college, to get financial aid and support.
mhm.
And so there's a lot of privatization that happens that excludes people of color in that journey, or make it very difficult for both, you know, people of color, but also people with low income.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I think it takes a lot. So most times what I have found within my friend group was like when they were talking about going to school, parents wanted their kids to be lawyers, they wanted their kids to be doctors, they wanted a return on the investment. In social work is not you don't get much of a financial return on the investment until much later in
Yeah.
practice. So
Mhm.
so I think because of that, the field is dominated by a lot of white women who have privilege to go to college, who have maybe more support financially. I know that wasn't the case for me in my journey, but
Mhm.
as I looked around in the classroom, there were a lot of white girls and not a lot of men, definitely not a lot of people of color, and definitely not a lot of bilingual services.
Yeah.
So and thinking about, you know, access to services, you know, there's a level of distrust in working with white women, I think. And I think it's reasonable. So I think, yeah, so I think for in terms of thinking about like how how my clients are self-referred now in private practice, like when I was doing community work, I worked with anyone who came in the doors of our health center, and our health center served predominantly Black and Brown clients. And so my services were offered to those clients and they could accept or deny. And most people accepted. But I think within private practice and behavioral health, people have to reach out and want the support. And so, um, you know, I think that there are real barriers for people if they make a judgment when they first see you as like, I don't want to work with a white girl, you know? So
Yeah.
yes, I
I
haven't had a
think
ton
there's
of
some of
interest.
that. Yeah, I think there's some of that. I know for me particularly, I wanted to make sure I worked with a Black woman therapist
Mhm.
because there's just things that they're going to understand that someone else may not understand. And they'll be able to speak from that perspective. Do I think that I could still gain from someone who is not Black? Yes, definitely. And so I think there's room for layering that. I do think there's the trust, but what I appreciate about just learning more about your journey and your life, because you're talking, I'm just like, dang, there's so many things I did not know about Patsy. Is that what I gather, at least, is that your journey in finding yourself has really been yours. And something that I think anyone could take away from this, if you are a non Black person and you find yourself in Black spaces, whether that's friend groups, families, or, in the service that you do in the community, is you just kind of like allow that space to be formed for you, while understanding that your journey was very personal for why you fit in that space, or why whatever it is that you were seeking in that space through the friendship and the camaraderie and the support, like you just allowed that to happen organically, which hearing your story definitely came with its own challenges, because you're also trying to find like where do you belong, you know, and your self-identification, but
excuse me,
allow it to flow. You know, if I'm in this space, I'm here and I'm available. But I'm not going to push, you know, and where I see that I could fit to support, like, and lend a voice, whether, like you said, you started in re-entry programs and working on equity projects in healthcare, like, I'm going to fit because those are things that I'm interested in. But in your private practice, it sounds like you're also putting together some of those principles that you had from your life, which is like, I'm Patsy. You know what I mean? Like, this is me. This is what I'm interested in. This is where I come from. These are my stories. And maybe that's why you had to actually start a private practice, because maybe you had to create that space again for yourself.
I think part of the switch to private practice was definitely like a lot of burnout and like disappointment in the city's response to substance use and homelessness and racism, because there's that's maybe another podcast,
Right.
but I was in the field for 10 years, and I felt like I just didn't see, I saw individual impact and felt really grateful for people accepting me into their lives to be a support, but people are facing so many barriers to be able to move forward, and there was just so much reoccurring trauma that for me, I knew that I in order to be a sustainable social worker and a good social worker, I knew I needed to step away from the front line, because I didn't want to become a bad social worker. I think there's nothing worse than a bad social worker. And so that, for me, a big part of like maintaining that commitment to direct service work is offering professional development and workshops on burnout prevention and workshops on, vicarious trauma, and doing clinical supervision where the company pays for clinical supervision for for case management staff or medical case management staff, which in the work that I do, I see that a lot of the medical case management staff or case management staff or housing support or advocates are more reflective of the community. So it can be more Black and brown and Caribbean. And so being able to offer that individual support that comes to the client in that situation is free, but for the institution, they're the ones who are paying for that support. That's one of the ways that I want to stay connected to the community work, supporting people sort of to be sustainable. So, but I do hope eventually that my practice grows, and that people feel comfortable, and that, finding a therapist is like dating, and you have to really trust the person that you're working with. And so I guess what I would say is to anyone out there who is looking for a therapist who is anxious about culture and cultural difference, bring that to your screening session. If there's someone who, if you're waiting to find the right therapist and you want that therapist to be Black or brown, I respect that tremendously. And I know that the wait will be longer because there's less access. And it's really important, if that's one of your values, to stick to that. So if in the meantime you need support and it's short-term support and you are going to work with someone who's outside of your culture, bring those questions to your screening session and challenge the person you're going to work with, because you don't want to end up working with someone who doesn't respect your values and your needs and doesn't understand your perspective. So bring those questions. You should be interviewing your therapist as much as your therapist is interviewing you when you first do that initial consultation. So ask those questions, and if they don't feel like the right fit, keep your search going.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Patsy, for
of course.
Being a guest on the Vocal Action Podcast. I'm smiling because this was a full circle interview, because you started off talking about your journey going through BPS and having these questions about representation. Are your classrooms, are your classes representative of the people in your neighborhood, of the makeup of your city? And now as a therapist, you are answering those questions, like you're providing that solution because now you know why they weren't. And this is your way of making sure that things can be more representative. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you.
For those that are watching and listening, how can people get connected with your services?
So I'm currently going to be going on maternity leave in a couple months. So I will be back to accepting clients in January.
Good.
And my website is villagehealingandwellness.com. So you can send a chat through there, or you can email me, which is Patsy at villagehealingandwellness.com. And I'd be happy to chat with you.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you, Patsy. Thank you all who are watching and listening. And we are signing off. I'm your host, Vashana Roach, the Global Strategy and Social Impact Leader, AKA, I don't know if I like that. I'm still trying to figure out what my sign off is. But I'm also an around the way girl going around the world. And this has been another episode of the Vocal Action Podcast. Peace.
Thank you for having me. Bye.